And we have Laura Harmon. Sorry, something just flashed up on my screen. Laura Harmon, who's the division manager for entitlement services. And we also have Alan Goodwin with the UDO team, Andrew Ossel, Mariah Wozniak, Yolanda Jones, Kevin May, and let's see who else. That looks like it's. And we also have Terry Hegler Gray here from the attorney's office, who has just joined us. So in addition to that, we have Arista Stringus, who's with Camiros, our consultant on the UDO project. So we have an array of people here, and hopefully we can answer all your questions as we move along. I'm going to share my screen now, and we'll get started. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah, can see it.
Okay, great. So what we're going to do today is have a virtual conversation about the administration articles in the UDO. Let's see. So what we're going to do today is the UDO staff will narrate the presentation. That will be myself and Laura Harmon, if when needed, or anyone else. Please enter any question or comment you may have in the chat box so that we can see it. We will attempt to respond to questions and comments in the chat as they're submitted. So if you'd like to follow along, click the chat button and you can see what questions are being answered and responses if you're interested. And then after the presentation, we're going to spend time at the end of the session to just present all the questions and comments that have been received so that everyone has a chance to know what those are. So our meeting purpose today is to clarify the contents of the administrative articles, explain them where it's needed, highlight sort of the major changes that are in the requirements to build awareness, and to answer any questions about what is included in the draft administration articles. The release of the first draft, which is out there in the public, was on October 7th of this year. And we are currently, as the schedule shows, we're in the public engagement section where we're receiving comments on the first draft. And it's been occurring since October and will continue into January. The second draft of the UDO will be released in March of next year. And you can see the rest of the key dates. There will be public engagements after the second draft. Then we will move to a council public hearing draft in May, with the city council public hearing tentatively scheduled for June, planning commission recommendation also in June, and hopefully adoption of the draft UDO in July of 2022. Any additional comments would go directly to council in July, and hopefully the adoption would be also in July. So what we're going to start now is going through the articles, and I'm going to give you a highlight of what is in the different articles, as well as things that have changed that are new that are in the UDO. So the first,
Sandy, before we get started with the other calls, we've asked folks that are on to go into chat and just tell us who you are and what organization you're with or representing for this, just so folks can know a little bit more about other folks that are on the call.
Good idea.
Maybe if we give people just a couple minutes to do that, and
sure.
Also for folks who aren't on Zoom all the time, to practice with the chat function, which should be at the bottom of your screen.
Has everyone had a chance to do that? There's another one. Keith just came on. Okay. I'm going to continue then. And if you're still putting your name in, feel free to keep doing that. It'll pop up over there. So in Article 1, it basically says that the UDO regulations will apply in the city and in the extraterritorial jurisdiction, the ETJ. All previously approved conditional and optional zoning districts will continue to meet the zoning regulations, the site-specific plans that were adopted, and any conditions that were part of that adoption. There's also some transition rules in Article 1 that will apply to development and land use related activities, actions, and other matters occurring as of the effective date of the UDO. But for instance, violations continue to be violation unless they're in compliance with the UDO. Previous development approvals can still be completed. There is a use transition table that describes how existing uses will be treated if a use permission category is changed. I know that's a little hard to understand. It was hard for me to kind of capture what that was. So I have an excerpt of the table. I hope you all can see the fine print. But it shows that the first column is the previous use category. For instance, if it was permitted use or permitted with prescribed conditions. The second column shows the UDO use category. Again, if it's a permitted use in a transition or permitted use with prescribed conditions. And then the functional change that will result. For instance, if there's any expansions or enlargements. So this is just an excerpt. The table is longer than this, but you will see if you were a permitted use with prescribed conditions, for instance, and you were that same use category in the UDO, you would have to, if you're going to have any additions or enlargements of that use, it would have to comply with any new prescribed conditions. So that's part of Article 1 if you want to reference that table. Also in Article 1, there's a new state of emergency declaration regulations that can suspend the application of all or a part of the UDO regulations. This would be some state of emergency declared by the president, FEMA, or some imminent threat alert, just to let you know that this is something new that's in our UDO. The effective date of the UDO is still under review, and as we move forward, we will be announcing what that might be. It's still under development at this point. Article 36 talks about the different ordinance bodies and administrators in the UDO. It talks about the powers and duties, the membership hearings, the procedures, the meetings and staffing for the City Council, the Planning Commission, Historic District Commission, and the new UDO Board of Adjustment, which is being proposed in the UDO. That board will be hearing variances and appeals. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. There's also a section about the designated administrators and directors and their administrative and enforcement responsibilities, if you want to delve into that. Also new in the UDO are additional conflict of interest regulations. There are new conflict of interest regulations standards for administrative staff. There's always been some for appointed bodies and City Council, but that's there if you'd like to review it. This is a sort of a table or a structure that shows the role of the UDO Administrator, which is not a supervisory position over the various administrators. You will see the Stormwater Administrator, the Zoning Administrator, Floodplain, Soil Erosion, Chief Urban Forester, and the Subdivision, Streets, and Infrastructure Administrator and the articles that they will be responsible for interpreting and explaining, interpreting, and any type of permits related to those articles. It deals with the UDO administrator deals with the overall administration of the UDO. And if there's conflicting regulations in the UDO, those will be decided by the UDO administrator. The UDO administrator will also manage the UDO Board of Adjustment. Next is Article 37 that talks about applications and interpretations. Applications are still within the different departments according to their procedures. Interpretations, the purpose of this section is to obtain a written interpretation of UDO regulations by someone who would like that. It's a similar process to what we have now in the zoning ordinance. They would be submitted to the UDO administrator this time instead of to the zoning administrator and the other administrators. And that would be transmitted now to the designated administrator for a written interpretation, which would be provided to the applicant and the property owner. New in the UDO is the interpretation also sent to the property owner. There's also new choices of how that interpretation will be delivered. It can be by electronic mail, personal delivery, or first-class mail. Article 38 deals with, among other things, amending the UDO. There's no major changes to the text amendment process for any of the articles in the UDO. There's the typical application submittal, a public hearing, planning commission recommendation, and city council decision. There is a new expiration policy in here for text amendment petitions. If a decision has not been reached within 2 years of the submittal date, the petition becomes null and void. Another part of Article 38 is the zoning map amendment process, which we know as rezonings, but we're changing the name in the UDO. And this is a process where a request is made to change the zoning district designation on a specific parcel or parcels of land. Again, very similar to the current zoning process. What is new is that no downzoning is allowed without the property owner's consent. And community meetings will be required for all zoning map amendments, conventional, conditional, and exception. Again, as with the text amendments, petitions for zoning map amendments will expire if the decision has not been reached within 2 years of the submittal date. The petition then would become null and void. There's basically 3 types of zoning map amendments: conventional, conditional, and our new exception district. An exception district is considered to be a conditional district. It's a mechanism to modify quantitative zoning standards. It's a district where new development concepts, special problems, unique proposals, and innovative designs can be considered. Standards of the UDO cannot be waived in their entirety. No modifications are allowed for uses or for maximum heights. And the proposal must include public benefits that exceed the minimum UDO requirements. And in this EX district can be applied to 13 zoning districts. Let me show you what they are. It's all the transit-oriented development districts, all the regional activity centers and community activity center districts. It's also allowed in the neighborhood center, the innovation mixed use district, and the IC2 is allowed in the campus section of districts, and the N2C in the neighborhood 2 districts. So 13 districts in all. public benefits that I mentioned. They can be in 3 different categories. I think the first one is sustainability, where the design and architecture establish standards such as LEED, Energy Star, and Earthcraft can count toward sustainability, as well as on-site renewable energy consumption and adaptive reuse of buildings. Public amenities that can be provided include publicly accessible open space, affordable housing set-asides, and public amenities. City improvements can be in construction or improvements to streets, medians, bike paths, transit stops, etc. Article 38 also has a process for administrative minor amendments. This is a process to amend an approved conditional site plan or the conditions associated with it that do not significantly alter the site plan or its conditions, and the change does not have a significant impact on adjacent properties. The process is very similar to the administrative minor amendment process in the zoning ordinance now. There are a few little modifications. For instance, there's the requirement for no reduction in vehicular bikes and bike parking spaces below the minimum or above the maximum. The bike parking spaces is a new addition to that restriction. And you cannot move structures closer to abutting properties in the N1 or N2 place type, or closer to single family, duplex, triplex, or quadruplex dwellings. And this has been modified from a residential district or abutting residential use. So those are a few of the modifications in this article. There's also administrative adjustments, which we have very similar in the zoning ordinance now. This is a process to allow for an adjustment of quantitative regulations in the zoning and tree protection regulations. Currently, an adjustment is permitted up to 5%, and this has been adjusted in the UDO to up to 10% permitted. The usual other adjustments that are permitted still include handicap ramps, encroachments to be compliant with ADA standards, and encroachments into the frontage, side and rear setbacks, or landscape yards for the restoration or replacement of historic features on an existing structure. The approval process for this goes through the designated administrator. Vested rights is also in Article 38. A vested right permits a property owner to continue use of or complete development on a property, even if the development regulations change. There are several types of vested rights. I'm going to go over the site-specific vesting plans first. Those are the ones that we have now in the zoning ordinance that can be up from 2 to 5 years, depending on what is requested, and therefore conditional, exception, zoning map amendments, and subdivision plats. What's new in the UDO per 160D is the multi-phase developments, which would vest an entire development with regulations in place at the time of the site plan approval, is granted for the initial phase for 7 years. The requirements are that it has to be a minimum of 25 acres in size. There must be a master plan with elements showing the type and intensity of use of each phase, and must be built in phases. And this does include zoning permits, site plan approvals, subdivision plat approvals, permits issued, and building permits. There's also development permits, which are good for a year or more, if specified as such in the UDO. The permit choice rule is also in Article 38. This is if a permit application for a development is submitted, and after the submission, but before the permit decision is made, a rule or ordinance is amended, then the applicant can choose which version of the rule or ordinance applies to the application and use of land. Permit choice rule extends to rules and regulations beyond the initial application for developments requiring multiple permits. So this is a new in the UDO and in 160D. The applicant must submit subsequent permit applications within 18 months of the approval of the initial permit to use the permit choice rule. Permit choice rule, for those, the signs and erosion and sedimentation control permits do not count as initial permits. Transitioning from the current ordinances to the UDO, the transition to the UDO can obviously create challenges for development projects that are already in progress. The UDO includes allowances related to vesting and permit choice. Staff is still exploring additional considerations for the adoption versus the effective date of the regulations. Conditional rezoning petitions that are submitted prior to UDO adoption, we're still looking at that. Projects that have initial permits approved prior to the UDO adoption is another area, and impacts of the zoning translation through the UDO. Our intent certainly is not to create any unnecessary burdens for property owners and staff. Variances are also in Article 38. A variance is a request to deviate from an ordinance regulation or regulations that is granted on a case-by-case basis, typically granted when practical difficulties exist that make the use of the property difficult. This is now going to be heard by the new UDO Board of Adjustment. The application and the quasi-judicial process remains very similar to that in the zoning ordinance. The findings of facts have been standardized across the different areas of the UDO, zonings, stormwater, trees, etc. And the one item that has been added to the findings of fact is a reasonable accommodation for a person with a disability under the Federal Fair Housing Act. That is new per 160D. There's no changes at all to the floodplain and water supply watershed protection variance processes. Those remain unchanged. Appeals is a process for an aggrieved applicant to request a higher board of authority to review the initial decision in hopes of overturning the decision. There's many types of appeals that are permitted. Notices of violation, orders, decisions or determinations, and even interpretations, assessment of penalties and remedies, cease and desist orders, stop work orders, proposed erosion and sedimentation control plan disapprovals or modifications. Appeals are, again, as I mentioned, heard by the UDO Board of Adjustment. The application and quasi-judicial process remains very similar to what we have in zoning now. There is a 30 days to appeal any one of those items I just went over, orders, notices of violation, etc., from the date of receipt of a written decision, and that remains unchanged. Stays of enforcement and penalties still remain in the UDO, and unchanged are the regulations for the post-construction stormwater control appeals, soil erosion and sedimentation control plan appeals, and drainage appeal process. Article 39, nonconformities. There are several types of nonconformities that may continue. We have legally existing uses and structures, elements, and sign as of the effective date of the UDO that become nonconforming may continue. Other nonconforming uses may be changed to another nonconforming use within the same use category. Nonconforming structures can expand subject to certain standards depending on the amount or percentage of expansions in the following zoning districts. You can see it's in the neighborhood commercial, regional activity center, the innovation mixed use, the Todd districts, the campus IC2, and the community activity CAC2 zoning districts. In incremental expansions after the adoption of the UDO will count towards the maximum permitted percentage or amount. Non-conforming accessory uses and structures. What is new is that in the UDO, above ground utility accessory structures or mechanical equipment can be replaced provided there's no increase in any existing nonconformity caused by an extension into a required side or rear setback. The replacement cannot exceed 42 inches in height if in an established setback along a frontage. Non-conforming exterior lighting. This is a new category of nonconformity. Alterations to existing non-conforming lighting that can bring that lighting into greater conformance can be permitted by the zoning administrator. Non-conforming signs and outdoor advertising signs, no changes there, and no changes for non-conforming lots. And the last article in administration, inspections and enforcement. The UDO regulations for inspection remain very similar to the existing inspection requirements for post-construction stormwater, signs, soil erosion and sedimentation control, storm drainage, subdivision streets, and infrastructure. As for enforcement, the procedures remain similar to the existing enforcement measures, except criminal misdemeanors will be removed from the draft UDO per state legislation that occurred just around the same time as the release of the first draft. The first draft was released October 7th, as you know. The community engagement meetings on this first draft will go through early January of 2022. We will continue with both in-person meetings and virtual meetings. Comments on the first draft will still be accepted through January 14th of next year. So feel free to submit your comments and updates. Future updates and more information, please go to charlotteudo.org.
Andy, could I jump in on the schedule if we could
Sure.
go back one?
Yep.
Just so that folks know, we have, I think after this, 4 more pairs of virtual meetings. And so for now, we finished the in-person meetings. We did those in the first part of this process and finished virtual. We are looking at possible adjustments to the schedule related to comments on the first draft. So, and possibly extending that time period. So I just wanted to go ahead and put that out there so folks would be aware of that and watch our website, as we will likely be putting some additional information out in the next few weeks.
Thank you, Laura, for that. I appreciate that. Our online virtual conversations will still continue to take place through January 11th. If you're interested in some of the remaining topics in January shown there. Each virtual conversation will focus on a specific topic, as you can see. The conversations are scheduled for a 1-hour length, with one session being from noon to 1 p.m. and the other on the same day, same topic, from 6 to 7 p.m. Registration is required to participate. And again, you can register online or use the QR code on the flyer, or go to udo.org to register. You can visit the UDO website. You can see the first draft, which is available for review, as you can see on the right side of your screen when you go to charlotteudo.org. Comments on the draft should be made on this online platform. You can see where it says read and comment on the UDO by topic area, So you can zoom in on what particular article you want to review and make comments on, and then move to other articles as you wish to make comments. Additional information is also available on the UDO website, including schedules, upcoming meetings, supporting documents, FAQs, and more. There is a reference guide also available online. You'll see it up circled here on the page. It says helpful resources on the UDO, charlotteudo.org website. It's a 26-page guide, which is easy to understand, hopefully, and walks through the first draft of the UDO to understand where more information on specific topics of interest or zoning districts reside in the articles. It also provides summary of some of the new regulatory concepts for the city, including residential overlays, parking tiers, tree preservation, and transportation improvements. With that, I am going to go back to our chat, and we'll review the questions and the responses. Let me see. I am not seeing that. Hold on a second. Here we go. Let's see. Okay, so I'm up at the first comment from Rob McAdams. Oh, this is where everyone changed their names for everyone and where they were. Let me scroll down. Right, I think we have the first one from Keith. Keith asked, as to the conditional zoning grandfathering, assume there are not time limits to reliance on plans and ordinances in place at time of approval. Also, as to the effective date, assume rezoning filings, even if not effective in terms of delayed acceptance due to the monthly case limit. This is a long question. I just lost my place scrolling. Here we go. Will be governed under the current ordinance, not the UDO. Did we have a response there? Laura, I'm not seeing responses there.
Hi, Sandy, Arista.
Uh-huh.
So Laura did respond. I also responded. So sorry, Keith, for the double response to at least the first question.
I see.
Yeah, so the CD conditional zoning approved under the current zoning ordinance, the zoning regulations that are in place when it was approved are the ones that will continue. And then she also answered the second question. With respect to those applications, those submitted prior to adoption of the UDO can continue through the process under the current zoning ordinance.
Thank you. I see those responses down after Faith asked her question. So Faith asked, so would a community benefits analysis be covered under the public benefits article on 38? Please elaborate. Thanks. I'm looking for a response. Laura wrote that the community benefits concept is still under study outside of the UDO process. A little further info on the public benefits reference in Article 38. These are related to the Todd EX rezoning requirements and are not the same as a CBA. I hope that answered your question, Faith. Did I miss another question up here? Let's see. That was Keith. Faith. All right. Keith asked, assume that the conditional rezoning will be available for pursuit in all zoning districts. Also, how will non-conditional optional districts be treated in the transition to the new ordinance? Laura responded that non-conditional or conventional zoning will translate to the new UDO zoning districts. We will then look at the alignment zoning after the UDO is adopted. Also optional, Keith asked, or Laura responded that optional rezonings are conditional and will be treated in the same manner. And conditional rezoning will still be available, but hoping it won't be needed as often. Thank you, Laura, for that response. Surely that's not the end of our chat. Is that the end of our chat questions?
That is the end of our chat
Wow.
questions, and maybe give people another minute or
Yeah.
two to see if there are any more questions. Well, since doesn't appear that we're getting more, we hope that this at least has given you some initial information to think about with respect to administration. This will be posted, this recording will be posted online in the next week or so. And we also have a session this evening. If you think, wow, I need to hear this one more time, you know that Sandy threw a lot of information at you. So Sandy, you want to wrap us up?
Yeah. Again, I want to thank you all for attending. Feel free to reach out if you have other questions about the content of the first draft. And remember to place your comments in the charlotteudo.org online platform that we have so that we can respond to your comments and questions. Again, thank you for attending. And with that, have a great holiday season and hope to see you soon.